This is Will Tchakirides interviewing Albert Lamont, Germany, for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. It is 10 a.m. on December 5th, 2025. This interview is being recorded at WEAA-FM 88.9 in Baltimore, Maryland. All right, please, first just state your full name for the record and tell me what your relationship is to this radio station, WEAA.
My name is Albert Lamont, Germany. I have been a part of the radio station since its birth. I was a student at Morgan State University when the station originally came on the air. On January 10th, 1977, at 3 p.m. That afternoon, the date resonates for me because it coincidentally happens to be my birthday. My birthday is January 10th, so the station was born when I was born. And I've been a part of the station in various capacities since that day, originally as a student intern, eventually as a full-time paid employee, part-time employee, community volunteer, news department, news director, sports director, and currently I serve in the capacity of play-by-play voice for Morgan football, basketball, softball, wrestling, and volleyball.
Excellent. Is it okay if I call you Lamont for this interview?
That's what everyone does, so go ahead and join the club.
All right. You've been gracious enough to give us your birthday date, but what year were you born and where were you born?
I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, born in Pittsburgh on January 10, 1958.
All right. Tell me a little bit about where you're from. Tell me about Pittsburgh, if that is the place you grew up, and I want to know what it felt like, what it smelled like, what it tasted like in Pittsburgh, what it looked like. Describe that place to us.
Yeah, when you grow up and live in the same place, you don't really know any other place. So I was always curious about other places because I'd never been anywhere, really until I came to matriculate at Morgan State University. So Pittsburgh was planet Earth to me. Didn't know anything above and beyond it except what you read in books, see on television, hear people talk about. So it was then and is now home with the people I was most comfortable with, familiar with, people I knew, people who loved me, people who hated me. They were all Pittsburghers. So I grew up in a neighborhood where it was a black enclave in a white suburb of Pittsburgh, just east of Pittsburgh, called Penn Hills. So the school district that I went to was overwhelmingly white at that time. It's changed significantly since. But when I was in grade school and all the way through high school, it was predominantly white. But the immediate neighborhood I lived in was primarily black. It was the black part of the white suburb where I grew up. And it was close-knit. You look back on it now with a little bit more fondness than you realize when you were a child, working class neighborhood, filled with people who looked out for each other, knew one another. We were friends, we were foe, we were together, we were enemies. I go back now and look upon the relationships were probably foundational to the rest of my life that I had in that neighborhood in Pittsburgh. We formed a Facebook group where we're online, keeping in touch with one another and what we're doing in our lives. And I'm getting to the age now where you're losing people. And the Facebook group consists largely of friends who I grew up with who are no longer with me. And you think of the impact that they had on you, positively and negatively, as you grew up in that neighborhood. And that neighborhood was really Pittsburgh to me. As a child, I really didn't have much of an opportunity to engage in the city writ large. I kind of lived in that neighborhood, went to school in that school district. My friends and associates were from that immediate neighborhood. And I learned more about Pittsburgh, ironically, after I moved. And I look back. One of the things that I learned, particularly being a radio person, I didn't realize Pittsburgh had an accent. I didn't know that Pittsburghers talk with an accent till I left. Went to school here in Baltimore at Morgan State University. And then I went home for Christmas. Pittsburgh people talk funny. All of a sudden, my ears became attuned to a Pittsburgh accent that I didn't know existed before. And even more particular to Pittsburgh, there was an African-American dialect that was particular to Pittsburgh, separate from white Pittsburgh and separate from any other African-American dialogue, to the point where when I hear somebody talk, either in person or in media, I can tell immediately that they're from Pittsburgh. Just the first sentence, I could tell that they're a Pittsburgher, something that I wasn't aware of until I moved away, then came back, and I heard this familiar tone and language use and pacing that felt familiar and funny at the same time. I'm proud of growing up in Pittsburgh, a sports fan in Pittsburgh, and when I was growing up, we were winning everything. The Steelers were winning the World Series. The Pirates were winning. Steelers the Super Bowl, the Pirates were winning World Series. My heroes, my original heroes in life were sports figures in Pittsburgh. Probably my first hero was Roberto Clemente, a baseball player who played during my childhood in Pittsburgh. And to me, he was, it was God, Mom, and Clemente, and not in that order necessarily when I was growing up.
Not just any baseball player, right, but an Afro-Latino baseball player.
Yes, and somebody who died while I was a child.
Plane crash, right?
Oh, man, it was a profound impact. If your hero in life passes away, somebody who you view as bigger than life, larger than life, I knew that all was right with the world as long as Roberto Clemente was batting third and playing right field for the Pirates. Then life on earth was just fine. And then when the day came when he wasn't, it kind of was a demarcation point in your life. There was life before Clemente, and there was life after Clemente. And life after Clemente was a whole lot different than the world that included Roberto Clemente. And I look back at how he lived his life and how he lost his life. He lost his life in service to other people he didn't even know, people he just wanted to help because he was in a position to help, and lost his life in that way. So he's one of my biggest heroes, not only in sports, but just as a human being.
Speaking of movement, tell me a little bit about where your people, the people who raised you, come from, and feel free to name them. But Pittsburgh, right, such a renowned destination for the Black migration in the early to mid 20th century. Who raised you, and where did your people come from?
On my mother's side of the family, they came from South Carolina. My grandmother was born in, close to Columbia, South Carolina is where she was born and raised, and she came to Pittsburgh, migrated in the early 20s, 1920s, is when she came to Pittsburgh. And all of her children, including my mother, were all born in Pittsburgh. And my mom and her 6 siblings were always extremely close. My aunts and uncles were my surrogate mothers and fathers, so they were just as instrumental in raising me as my mom and dad were. My dad's family is from Alabama. His mother came to Pittsburgh in the 1930s. My dad was born in Alabama. My dad was born in 1928 in Alabama, but he barely remembers living there. He was a toddler when the family moved to Pittsburgh. My mom and dad separated and went their separate ways relatively early in my life. Before I was 10, maybe 7, 8, 9, they tried to patch it back together again, back and forth. By the time I was 10, they were separated completely. And my dad eventually moved to first Washington, D.C., and then eventually to New York. So I was primarily raised in a single-parent household with my mom. All my siblings were sisters. I had 3 sisters, and the 4 of us were raised in that enclave in suburban Pittsburgh. Penn Hills is the suburb in which I was born and raised, and lived there up until the time that I came to college.
And where do you fall in the pecking order of your siblings?
I have 1 older sister and 2 younger sisters, so somewhere in the middle.
Did the church matter in your family?
Exceedingly. My mother and my grandmother belonged to a Baptist church in Pittsburgh, Mount Arrett Baptist Church, which is in the East Liberty neighborhood of Pittsburgh. And it was mandatory when I was a child that I go to church. I didn't want to. I was forced to. And I told Mom one time early on that I wanted to stay home and watch the Steelers on Sunday. I didn't want to go to church on Sunday. And she said to me, and I'll never forget it, she said, "I'll make a deal with you. We are going to go to church, but as soon as we set foot in the church, the moment we get there, we're going to pray for Franco Harris. We're going to pray for Mean Joe Green that he stopped being so mean. We're going to pray for Lynn Swan. We're going to pray for Terry Bradshaw." And then a few years later, Mom said, "Look at all those Super Bowls they won. Aren't you glad we went to church and we prayed for the Steelers?" So, yeah, church played a very pivotal role in my upbringing. And it helped mold me and shape me in ways that I probably didn't even realize until I became an adult.
How so?
I think it impacted my sense of the value of community. I think at my core, I am a private person, not particularly a social person. I guess the term is loner. But church makes you fight that component because church is essentially about community. And so it helped me explore aspects beyond myself, and not even aspects that are religious in nature. You form personal relationships from people that you meet in church, and they extend beyond the building and they extend beyond Sundays. And without church, I think it helped to open me up more as a person, beyond just the faith component and the religious component, just as a human being.
What did you like to do as a kid? Did you play sports?
Yeah. I think there were basically 2 things that really drew my interest when I was a kid. I mentioned earlier that my father didn't grow up. When I grew up, my father wasn't in the household. But it gave me a curiosity about who my father was and what he did. My father was a radio announcer. And so knowing what he did, wanting to be a radio announcer was probably my way of being with him. If I can't be with him, then I'll do what he does. And so my father was on the radio first in Pittsburgh. I have very limited memories of his radio days in Pittsburgh. He eventually moved to Washington, but he spent most of his radio career in New York. And so I used to just always pretend to be my father. I pretended to be on the radio. He was a music DJ in Pittsburgh, D.C., New York. And so I pretended to be on the radio, and I would radio announce everything. When I'm eating my Captain Crunch in the morning, I would announce the back of the cereal box. When a game come on television, I would turn the sound down, and I would announce the game sitting in front of it. When I was playing sports, I'd be playing second base, but I'd be announcing the game while playing the game. My neighbor, Kevin Nelson, is at the plate. Ball one. Strike one. High fly ball to left field. The left fielder, Robbie Tolliver, drops it. I'm actually announcing it while I'm playing it. I wanted to do what my father did, be who my father was, follow in my father's footsteps, I think as a way of attaching myself to my dad. When I got a little older and we were able to travel, my mom would put us on a bus to New York to visit my dad. And he worked at several radio stations in New York, and I would always visit him at those radio stations.
These are commercial stations?
Yeah, he worked at WBLS in New York, WLIB in New York, WWRL in New York, first as an on-air talent, but eventually in a management capacity. And I just thought my dad was the greatest person that ever spoke on a microphone. And it was the greatest thrill for me every summer to spend the entirety of the summer in New York, going with my dad to the radio station. And I had pretended to be my dad before that as an adolescent, before I was old enough to get on a bus and travel. And now actually being with him, seeing what he did, I knew what I wanted to do at that point. And it was one of those things where it was natural. It's like that comfortable pair of jeans that you put on. You feel that that's where you belong. And I had a sense of belonging, not only in the connection it made between me and my dad, but the connection it made for me in finding, where do I fit in on planet Earth? What am I here to do? And radio seemed to be that thing for me.
What was your dad's name?
His name was Albert, like mine, Albert Germany. Only he did not have a middle name. I had a middle name, Lamont, and so people used to always call him Albert and me Lamont.
And your mother's name?
Mother's name is Marion. Marion Cynthia. Her maiden name was Hall.
Now tell me a little bit about playing sports as a youth, and did that also give you a sense of community?
I wasn't good at anything sports-wise. I played it because I enjoyed it. Yeah. I just enjoyed playing it. But I wasn't maybe better at baseball, but really not really good at baseball either. But maybe just a little better at baseball than I was football, basketball. I also played soccer in the neighborhood. And it's really funny to me. We had pickup baseball games in my neighborhood, and that doesn't exist anymore, especially in African American neighborhoods where just a bunch of kids are just hanging out and hey, let's go to the field and play some baseball. Basketball, yeah, but baseball, no. It's almost a sea change in how baseball is culturalized in our community. We had pickup baseball games every day. We would go and spend all day playing baseball. But I was never very good at it, and that wore on me because you play with people who could shoot, who could run, who could throw, who could catch, and all I brought was effort. I was going to give you effort because that's what I had. Mm-hmm. I was not going to cheat you when it came to effort. So I knew early on that I liked sports, but I also knew that there wasn't any long-term future in it for me because everybody was bigger, stronger, faster than I was. But I wanted to be associated with it in some capacity.
The culture drew you in.
It did.
Now, Lamont, tell me a little bit about race in greater Pittsburgh and what it was like navigating what I believe was a pretty segregated society.
Yeah, it was. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a black enclave of a white suburb. So all throughout school, from first grade to 12th grade, the classmates were predominantly white. I did have a few years, my first few years, where we went to a black elementary school before busing came to Pittsburgh, and we were bused what seemed like a million miles away to an elementary school that was as far away from my neighborhood and still be in the jurisdiction, which was Penn Hills, that I lived in. And I remember the very first time that I realized that my black skin made a difference. It was an episode in school shortly after maybe fourth grade when I started going to school with predominantly white people. There were two of us, two black kids in my fourth grade class, me and Vernon Woods. We were the only two blacks in that particular class. And so there was a bathroom break one day. And Vernon was a lot more outgoing and playful than me. I was a more quiet, shy person. So Vernon was doing what kids do. He was hanging on the stall in the bathroom, just kind of playing and hanging. And after the bathroom break was over, we went back to class, and the teacher, the white teacher, he said, "I want to know who that was hanging on the bathroom stall during the break. Vernon, Lamont, I knew it was one of you because I saw your hands." And I don't know, it just hit me that just having black hands made me the bad guy just because my hands were black. No, Vernon was actually the one who did it, but me having black hands like Vernon had black hands, it made me the enemy. It made me the bad person. It made me a suspect. It's the first time that I culturalized that being black meant that everything everybody else black does, particularly if it's negative, I have to shoulder that. Mm-hmm. That's part of me doing it because my hands are black too. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to tell on Vernon that he did it, so I didn't. I just didn't even respond to it. Vernon didn't either. So he punished both of us. Both of us had to stay, detention. It wasn't physical punishment of any kind, but we had to stay after school.
Yeah, that's
and because we didn't tell, he said, "I know it was one of you, so both of you have to stay after school." And that's one of the first times in my life that I realized that walking around America every day, regardless of how I individually behave, that almost didn't matter as much. That everything that black people did, particularly if it's something negative, I'm going to have to somehow be accountable for those actions. You don't necessarily get to be an individual if you're black. White people get to be an individual. You get to be Will. But I'm going to be Lamont, the black person, until they put me in the ground. I don't get to be Lamont. I'm just Lamont. Can I just be Lamont? And it seems like our culture won't let me just be Lamont. And there's some things about that that's good, some things about that's not so good. But I always thought I came into this world an individual. And when they bury me, it's going to be just me in that casket, an individual. But in between, I don't always get to be that individual in the culture that we live in.
How'd your mom react when you told her about that story?
She was angry. She wanted me to speak up. And, hey, I didn't do it. I was always a shy kid. And my mother used to always chastise me about not speaking up, not telling people what's on your mind, how you feel. I was so shy. Well, I remember an episode in third grade. I had to go to the bathroom. I was too shy to raise my hand and say, "Can I be excused? I need to go to the bathroom." I was just too shy. So I just went to the bathroom sitting in my seat. And I'm thinking to myself, it'll dry up and nobody will notice. Of course, it didn't work out that way. And, got called out in class. My uncle had to come change the clothes in the middle of the class day. And my mother, "Boy, if you don't open up your mouth and talk." And I think that's what another thing radio gave me. I'm a shy person, but I get on the microphone, and it's a way to overcome my natural shyness. I use it as the microphone as a weapon. I'm going to beat this shy thing. That for whatever reason, that's who I am and who I've always been. But when it's time for the microphone to come on, I flush that shyness down the toilet. And I think radio has been that for me. My escape from my reticence about speaking up, letting the world know I'm here. This is what I think. This is what I feel. Radio was that avenue for me to escape my own internal shyness. That is still, I think, a core part of my personality to this day.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned busing? Did you have to bus to a predominantly white school?
I did. First 3 years, there was a black elementary school relatively close to my neighborhood. So first grade, second grade, third grade, no. But after that, from fourth grade until 12th, we had to bus. And the thing that really stood out to me about that experience, first of all, the bus ride to me was enjoyable. I actually liked getting on a bus in the morning. And it was a rigidly segregated suburb. Black people lived where black people lived. White people lived where white people lived. This was in the 70s in Pittsburgh. So I would see things I would otherwise not have seen, visit places I would otherwise not visit, have experience with people that I otherwise would not have had experiences with. And I was always curious, even though shy, but curious. So I was curious about the language people would use, the music that people would listen to, the things that they would do in social settings that were different than us. There is this term that's used in Pittsburgh, and some people outside of Pittsburgh have become familiar with it. They call Pittsburgh yinzers because instead of you, they use the term yins. But that is strictly a white Pittsburgh thing. Black people in Pittsburgh do not say yins, have never said yins. I've been black. I grew up in Pittsburgh. Nobody in my neighborhood ever said yins. That's a white Pittsburgh thing, even though it's kind of labeled as a Pittsburgh thing overall. But that is strictly white Pittsburgh. Black people don't use that term, never have used that term. But I would hear that, when I'm being bussed and I'm sitting beside and in class with. And I got one very close white friend that I went basically from fifth grade on. His name was Gary DeFrank. I still remember his name to this day, although I don't think we've been in any kind of contact with each other since graduation day. I graduated from high school in 1976. Since that day, I don't think we've spoken or had any contact. But he's my closest white friend. And he used to ask me questions all the time about what it was to be black. And the questions were curious to me because I always thought that I was just a person. It's the same as being a person. You're a person and I'm a person. So we have a lot of the same things. We both like sports. We both like the Pirates. We both hate math. We both like girls. We're both human beings, but he would ask me in a way that somehow being black was a different species, almost.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, was it from a perspective of sort of biological or cultural difference, or was it from a place of empathy where trying to understand, hey, you're black in America, and, like, what does that mean for you?
I think it was both. I think it was both. I think it was curiosity about the experience of being black in this country, and specifically, I don't know if we thought worldly at that point, just being black in Penn Hills, being black in this high school. What is that like? And he would ask me biological questions. Do you get sunburn being black? But on the one hand, it was curiosity, but on the other hand, he was being honest. It was just his because I was the first black person that he had an opportunity to get close to and talk to and get to learn as an individual. And when I look back on it, he felt close enough to me that he was going to just open himself up to things that he was thinking about anyway, that his white friends were talking about. I have a black friend, so I'm just going to ask them. And so I appreciated the honesty of him being open enough, curious enough, rather than just talk about black people being this, that, or the other. I'm going to ask my black friend, what is his day-to-day experience like? And so we used to have those conversations all the time. And I remember the very first time I met his mother. I think he forgot his lunch money, and his mother brought his lunch money to school one day. And she pulled up while we were on the playground. And she said, "So you're Lamont. You're the one that Gary is always talking about. You're his black friend." She wanted to come over to me and hug me, and "I want you to come visit us one day." I never did. "We want to have you over for dinner. That's all he does is talk about you. Finally get a chance to meet you." And for me, white people were Leave It to Beaver, because that's the only white people I know is who I saw on TV. So I thought white people just had a Leave It to Beaver existence in their homes and in their families. And, as I mentioned, my dad wasn't there, but I pictured white families, their dad was there and came home from work with a suitcase and gave the mom a kiss on the cheek and, "Hey, honey, what's for dinner today?" To me, that was whiteness. And she was so real. She reminded me of my mother in terms of affection, see how much she cared for her son, and by extension, she extended that same caring for me because she knew the closeness that me and her son had. And so it kind of opened up my eyes to the other side of the tracks, as it were, from what I had become accustomed to and where I lived and where I grew up.
Now, coming up in Pittsburgh, you're going to junior high and high school in the mid-'70s here. Is sort of the Black Power movement, that cultural nationalism and consciousness, Black pride, Afrocentrism, is this infiltrating your thinking or how you approach the world in any way at that time?
It did. I think the main avenue for me was music and television. I grew up in an era where it was rare to see a black person on TV. It was really a big deal when a black person showed up on TV, so much so that when it occurred, the whole neighborhood was buzzing about it. "Did you see the black person on the Andy Griffith show today? You had to look in the back real close, And then the other person was, no, they wasn't really black. You must have, your TV must have been a little fuzzy. That wasn't an actual black person. But when a black person actually came on TV, it was an event because we didn't see ourselves on television. It was something to talk about, something that you remembered. And then, Will, when we actually had a show where the whole show was black people, that was like we moved to another planet.
Talking about like those Norman Lear sitcoms,
yeah,
right?
when you had the Jeffersons and you had Good Times, where the whole show, it was a show where all the characters were black. Are you kidding me? Is this America? Because as I was growing up, we were nowhere. We didn't exist.
And how did that feel for you to see those characters on TV?
It made me feel that we, and even myself, that we mattered on some level. And it almost didn't matter whether the show was funny. It didn't matter whether the character was a positive one or a negative one. Just to turn on the TV and see somebody black and see somebody that had an afro and went to a barbershop that looked like the barbershop that you went to and listened to the music. There was one black radio station in Pittsburgh. Listen to music that you listened to.
Can you name that station?
WAMO. Anybody that grew up black in Pittsburgh knows WAMO. WAMO was the only. There just wasn't enough African Americans for the market to have more than one black station. There was an attempt, briefly, a second station as a competitor, but the market just wasn't big enough in terms of African American presence to have more than one. So yeah,
was it an AM station, right?
It was AM and FM.
AM FM.
The name more or less simulcast. When I grew up, AM was more of a force in my earlier years. FM was more educational. AM was the radio of prominence back then. Now, obviously, that's changed. But when I was a kid growing up, it was AM radio. So it was WAMO, AM, and they played the Aretha Franklins and the James Browns and the Gladys Knights and the Stevie Wonders. That's where you heard that music on that station. And to finally see us represented, not just on the radio, but now on TV, I could see us. It was a revelation. And you never missed a black show. That was appointment viewing anytime a black show came on, because that was an era where we're everywhere now in the media. But back then, we were nowhere. There were no black people on TV. And then it exploded. There were just show after show after show after show, black people. And in some ways, it was, I guess on some level, we do exist and we do matter.
Now, tell me, you're developing this consciousness, a sense of pride in what you're seeing in the culture. Does this influence or shape your decision on where you're attending college? Talk to me about the decision to eventually matriculate at Morgan State.
I think there were probably two reasons why I eventually decided to go to an HBCU. One primary reason was my mother wouldn't let me go anywhere else. She was really insistent that I go to a black school. There was a conversation that I had, and I guess I just can't believe that I said this, but I said it when I was, 12, 13 years old, just sitting around the dining room table. Black people do talk about race. It impacts everything, where you live, what you eat, what jobs you have, don't have, especially then. And I remember saying something out loud at the dinner table. And my mother heard it, and she didn't say anything in the moment, but I think it impacted her. I remember saying that white people are better white people are smarter. White people work harder. I remember saying that and believing that.
Mm-hmm.
I actually believed that. I believe that me as an individual, black people as a group, we were lesser than. Because when I looked around the world through my 10, 11, 12-year-old eyes, the higher the totem pole was, the wider that totem pole was. And the lower on the cultural totem pole, that's the spaces and places that we seem to occupy. So at my level of maturity at the time, I thought that was a reflection on us. We're just not as good. That's why.
And what'd your mom say?
She didn't say anything. She didn't respond.
But she said you're going to an HBCU.
At all. No, I made the observation like when I'm 10, 11, 12.
Oh, younger. Okay.
But when I'm ready to think about college, 5, 6 years later, I'm 17, 18, and now I'm thinking about going to school. I'm sure I haven't forgotten that I said that. I'm sure she didn't forget that I said that. And I think that was one of the reasons. She never outwardly said that, but I believe that was one of the reasons why she said that, no, you're going to go to. They didn't call them HBCUs then. You're going to a black college.
And when you get to Morgan, how does that perception of race begin to change? Does it change for you?
Almost overnight. You're around African Americans who are in charge. They're running things. In my limited experience, the white person was always the teacher. The white person was the principal. The white person was my mother's boss. Even at the black radio stations my father worked for, the white people were the boss at his radio stations. So white people ran things, white people were in charge, white people were the decision makers as I was growing up. I didn't have an experience where black people to any significant extent were in those capacities. I land on a black campus, and black people are running stuff. Black people are making the decisions. Black people are in charge. And then I'm associating with black people who are not just smart. There are black people who are frickin' brilliant. Some professors here, wow.
Do you remember any of their names, and what did you like to study?
I remember I was, again, ever since I can remember wanting to do anything, I wanted to be like my dad. So I studied communications. When I first got to Morgan as a freshman, they didn't have the radio station. The radio station came in my sophomore year. But I was still a communication major. And some of my professors, Dr. Lucia Hawthorne, she would make us sing, lift every voice before every class. And because I was in that major, I had her for a lot of classes. And at first, it didn't really make sense to me that she would make us, literally before every class, we'd have to stand, lift every voice, and the James Weldon Johnson song. Mm-hmm. She would make us sing it. And after you sing it over and over and over again, your natural curiosity kind of kicks in. This is pre-internet, so you can't just whip out your phone and look up James Weldon Johnson. You have to actually physically go to a library, find the book, open it, and read it. So it took some effort to try to find what the song was all about, what he was all about, what the meaning of it was. And at first, when I first started singing it as a freshman, I just sang it because the teacher asked me to sing it. I wasn't invested in what it meant and why she was asking us to do it.
Did you get a sense that there's this longer history of black power and self-determination, leading up to that time, that it wasn't, that there was a sense of community control and power in the decades preceding your time entering Morgan?
It gave me a sense of the totality of the black experience, because for me, black people were just basically three things. First, we were slaves, and then the nice white man, Abraham Lincoln said, "You don't have to be slaves no more." Thank you, Abraham. Appreciate you. And then Martin Luther King marched so we could vote and stuff. And then he gave a speech, and that was the end. That's black people. That's
traditional
our experience.
white-controlled narrative about black people.
Yeah, that's it. That's all we ever did. That's all we ever were. We were slaves. Then Lincoln freed us, and then Martin Luther King marched, and so we could vote. The end. So that's kind of my perception of the totality of what being black was. And so when she made us sing that song, it made me look a little deeper into what the African American experience has been. A little bit more depth, more totality. It was gradual, but as you discover things, you feel cheated.
What'd you find? What really stuck out to you?
One of the things that stuck out to me was the celebration. When I was coming into Morgan, it was the mid-'70s when this country was celebrating 200 years of being a country. So there was a whole lot of activity, a whole lot of media exposure to the bicentennial, 200th anniversary, 1776, 1976. This is when I'm matriculating at Morgan. This is when I'm first a student.
Big deal in this country.
Yeah, real big deal. 200 years of freedom, justice, and equality. And I did the deeper dive largely because of Dr. Hawthorne made us sing that song. A democracy is when everybody has a chance to fully participate in the culture. We didn't have a chance to fully participate in the culture. This is like 1976 until the last 10 years, 1966, when Martin Luther King had to march and fight and scream and holler and ultimately take a bullet on the balcony just so we can have a ham sandwich on the lunch counter, just so we can sit anywhere on the bus that we wanted to sit. 200 years of freedom for who? Maybe we've had 10 years, maybe. And I'm not sure that we're really free now. I'm speaking the 1976 me. So this 200 years of celebrating freedom, it made me take a second look at that, at how the country writ large, white America, was embracing that bicentennial and what it meant to us. And then I started to think about my previous generations. I maybe got 10 years, but what about my mom, and what about my aunts and uncles, and what about my grandparents? They got like none, like zero. And so what is all this screaming and shouting and freedom and truth, justice, and the American way about when, my uncle, my mom's brother, comes back from the war. He was in the Korean War. And just some restaurants he can't go to. How free is that?
Is there, as they're experiencing this oppression, is there a sense of hope for the next generation? Are they instilling that in the next generation?
I always thought, and I think wrongly so now, I always thought that eventually it would get better, just because, that it would get better. That, it was probably bad for my mom and bad for my grandma, but Martin Luther King gave a speech, so we fixed all that, right? So everything's good now. So we can vote, and I can go and have a sandwich anywhere, and I can sit at a lunch counter anywhere, so everything's fine. And it'll get even better in 1986 and 1996 and 2006. And so I think my perception was, and maybe it was a perception born out of just blind optimism, that it's just going to get better just because people are good. You know, my friend Gary in school, he was a white guy. He wasn't a bad person. So as we move forward, we're going to get better. That's the perception that I had in my head.
But what's the reality on the ground?
The reality is starkly different. Getting better doesn't just happen just because. It's not like preordained and it's going to get better. Just like the progress that we were able to make was a function of struggle, any progress that we continue to make, we're going to have to continue to struggle. And if we want to maintain that progress, there is going to be struggle. And the sacrifice just to get the most basic things, like can you stop lynching us? Can we do that? Can we accomplish that? Is that too much to ask? That we stop being hung from trees? Is that okay? The sacrifice just to accomplish core humanity. You have to sacrifice so much just to get basic things. And then how dare you speak that truth? How dare you complain about the inequity? How dare you point it out? You become the problem for merely pointing out the reality of what the existence is. Was always perplexing to me.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Now tell me a little bit about the culture here at Morgan, whether it's homecoming or whether you pledge to a fraternity or what have you. What are you sensing in the culture of Morgan State? Describe it to me.
The first thing is I do not have to leave my blackness at the door. That's the first thing. It was a liberating feeling. I talked to you about having to be bused to white schools. I always felt when I entered a white space that I had to act a certain way, comport myself a certain way, speak a certain way, wear certain clothes. I had to make sure that I functioned in a way that white people would approve. I didn't want to disappoint white people. My feeling was that if I'm going to get anywhere in this life, if I'm going to be able to, buy a house, get a job, get it promoted, white people are going to have to like me. There's going to have to be somebody white that's going to have to say, yeah, he's okay. Yeah. And if I didn't please white people, I was not going to have a productive life. So my life was geared toward, let me make sure white people like it. It mattered less at a certain stage in my life if somebody black said, oh, that was good. Oh, you sound good on the radio. It mattered less. It mattered more if somebody white said I sounded good. Somebody white said I sounded good. I must really be good if somebody white said I was good. I sought white approval.
Even at Morgan?
Tacitly, and even when I got to Morgan. Because I brought everything that I experienced before Morgan with me to Morgan. Mm-hmm. That was still a part of me. And so when I first started in radio here at Morgan, at WEAA Radio on Morgan's campus, and I got compliments about what I was doing on air. In my mind, I didn't really get the pinnacle of where I wanted to be in radio until I got that same approval in the white radio world. That was my internal, not my external. But that's what I'm thinking to myself. I'm good, but I'm good at an HBCU radio station. I'm good at this black radio station at this black campus. But is that really good? Does that translate to good at a white radio station, because that's really good if it's at a white radio station. This is what's in my head.
No, I get it.
When I'm a freshman, sophomore at Morgan.
Now, before we get to those early days of WEAA, tell me what are you thinking about in Baltimore? How is Baltimore as a city different than Pittsburgh?
It scared me because there's so many black people. Pittsburgh, as I mentioned earlier, about 15, 20% when I'm growing up, and it's not much different now in terms of the black population. And like I said, we only have one black radio station. That's all the market could really bear. And then I come to Baltimore. They had 4 or 5 black radio stations, and including the one on campus here at Morgan. But there were 3 or 4 others, commercial stations, that were black. If you go downtown Pittsburgh and you run into a black person, it was rare. It was so much so that we would make sure we spoke to one another because, hey, there's another black person over there. Baltimore's black people everywhere. Wow. It's black person here, black person there, black person everywhere. So on the one hand, it was comforting because you saw so many black people. On the other hand, you've been culturalized so much that black people are a problem. Black people are less than. Again, the speech I gave to my mom when I was 11, 12 years old, that white people are better. Now I'm seeing all these black people around me. Do I need to be afraid? And then I look at them, wait a minute, I'm black. So there's a kind of a conflict internally that's within me when I first get here. Am I comfortable or not? I grew up in 80% white Pittsburgh, and where black people were the rarity. Now, Baltimore, black people were the majority. The majority of the Baltimore city was African American, and that was a cultural touchstone for me coming from Pittsburgh.
And take me into those early studio days at WEAA. Did radio help you kind of work through that conflict, that internal conflict that you're kind of negotiating? And if you can, who was here? Who did you see? What was it like in the early days of WEAA, which comes on the air in 1977?
Well, I remember the very first day, the very first moment when we came on the air. When the radio station first started, they had to get FCC approval to actually flip the switch and go on air. And on that day, we were waiting for the phone call from the FCC to say, yes, okay, WEAA can officially go on air. We were housed in a different building than we're housed in now, another building across campus. It was converted classrooms that they made into a radio station. And Kwesi Mfume, who was a congressman, he was a city councilman, he's a congressman again now. He was president of the NAACP. At that time, he was a media personality in Baltimore, and he was the first program director, and he was the first voice ever heard on WEAA. And I can remember that day when they said we were going to be able to go on at 3 o'clock. I was in the newsroom preparing to do news that day. I was part of the very first newscast on the very first day the station went on the air. I always knew I wanted to be in radio, and way back then they had these things called third-class licenses that you had to have in order to operate equipment. You don't have to do that anymore, but you have to have a license. So back then you had to have a license. I didn't have a license.
Each individual had to apply for that license.
Yep. So they said if you just want to speak on the radio, you don't need a license. In order to operate the equipment, you needed to have the license. So I said, I wanted to be like my father, DJ. I wanted to be able to spin the turntable, but I don't have a license. I'm going to be on the radio anyway. Can I just read the news? I'll just do the news. I won't touch the equipment. Okay, you can do that. But you can't operate the equipment because you don't have a license. So I said I'll be a newscaster until I can be a DJ like my dad. Fell in love with news and never wanted to do anything else but news and sports. But anyway, at the time, I only did news because I just wanted to be on the radio. and I couldn't be a DJ because I couldn't operate any of the equipment.
Do you happen to remember the news stories of that day or any subsequent days at that time?
Yeah. It was January 10th, 1977. Jimmy Carter had just been elected president in 76. He hadn't taken office yet. He would take office like about 10 days later. So Gerald Ford was still the president, and Jimmy Carter was coming into office. And he had picked Andrew Young as a person who was going to be in his cabinet. He's going to be an ambassador.
From Atlanta, yeah.
Yeah, from Atlanta.
Movement activist.
Yep. And we had an interview with Andrew Young as one of the African Americans who was going to be in Jimmy Carter's cabinet.
On that first day?
We had an interview with him earlier.
Okay.
After he was named. The station wasn't even on the air yet, but we were still doing interviews. And we were archiving them for when we were on the air that we could play them.
Oh, wow.
And so finally we're on the air that day, and we said we're going to use it because Jimmy Carter's going to be president here in the next couple of weeks. So we're going to use the interview that we did. And it was a group of us students who interviewed him on the phone. He wasn't physically in studio, and I was one of the students that interviewed Andy Young. So I was preparing and editing, and back then editing wasn't a computer thing. You had to get tape and razor blades in order to edit the interview. And so are we going to be able to get this interview in time? First of all, are we even going to go on the air that day? Because every day we were being teased as whether this was the day the FCC was going to allow us to actually go on the air. So we would prepare a newscast every day just in case that was the day. And so finally we learned that today was the day. You're going to go on at 3. The newscast is going to be at 6 that I was preparing. And so they had me do the Andy. I wasn't the only one who interviewed him, but I was one of the voices. And so they had me do that interview, edit what we were going to use, write the copy leading into and out of it, and presenting it on the air when 6 o'clock came around. It wasn't our lead story. We led with local news that was happening in Baltimore. But then finally my turn came to do the national news. And I was talking about what else was going on nationally at that time. And at the end, they wanted me to do the Andrew Young interview. So get to the point where we're supposed to play segment of the interview. Then I learned live radio, sometimes you have technical difficulties. This is my first day. I'm a sophomore. I don't know what to do or say. Comes to the point where the interview is supposed to play, and it doesn't play. So now there's like dead air. So what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to say? I don't know what I'm supposed to do, what I'm supposed to say. This is my first time on the radio ever in my life, on live on the air. And so the news director, he literally walked into the newsroom where we did the newscast from, and he handed me copy to read. And I just started reading it. It was just additional national news that was going on that day, totally unrelated to the Andy Young interview. I never made any on-air explanation as to why people weren't hearing his voice, because I introduced it as if you were going to hear his voice.
And it never aired?
It didn't air. And I just started reading the national news that he had just literally put in front of me. And I'm nervous, and I'm sweating, and the copy I'm reading is getting wet because my hands are sweating, and I'm just looking to try to get through it. So I'm going fast as I can to try to get through it, and I run through the original script he gave me, and he has to give me more because there's more time that has to be filled for my particular segment. And I finally get to the end of it. I wrap it up, and I said to myself, I'm never going on the radio again the rest of my life. It didn't turn out that way. I've been on the air now for however many years, almost a half a century now since then. But that was my baptism on the first day. But I got to say, Will, we were so proud to have our own radio station. You got to realize the media landscape back then. There was no internet. There was no social media. There was radio and TV. That's it. End of story. That's all there was. And we had our own radio station. Nobody could tell us anything at that point. And there was a core group of us students who really took pride in making sure that we stepped up to the plate. And that's what made me feel so bad about that first time experience. I'm going to show the world what we can do. And then I fall on my face on that very first on-air experience.
Who was that news director who handed you that
His
copy?
name was Dave Levin. He was the initial news director when we came on the air in January of 1977. He was white, and I have to point that out for a couple of reasons. There was some animosity about how stories were presented, language that we use, how we particularly present stories from an African-American perspective.
This is We Educate African Americans. Right?
Exactly. This was when apartheid was alive and kicking in South Africa. And so we did a lot of stories about apartheid. And some of the people who were fighting apartheid, the ANC, the African National Congress, they had a faction of the ANC that was really aggressive to the point where they were called guerrillas, rebels. Our program director, Kwesi Mfume, did not want us to use the term guerrillas. He said we have to use the term freedom fighters. They're fighting for their freedom. Under the existing apartheid, they have no freedom. Guerrillas is a negative term. It invokes a negative connotation of who they are and what they're doing if we call them guerrillas. Also, being black, calling them guerrillas, has another layer of negative connotation. So he was adamant that we were not going to call them guerrillas. We were with NPR. NPR used a lot of BBC news feeds, and the BBC referred to them as guerrillas. We had to edit the word guerrillas out of the BBC reports before we put them on the air. And there was a conflict between the news director then, a white gentleman named Dave Levin, and the program director, Kwesi Mfume, about the language that we should be using as it regards this conflict. And Dave Levin's argument was they're doing some really violent things in their cause. And those violent things need to be pointed out. And that's part of the reason why the term guerrillas was being used by majority media, because of the violent faction of the ANC. And Kwesi's position was, this is not just violence born out of nothing. This violence came about because of the circumstances that they found themselves in. And those circumstances meant that they had to fight for their freedom. Wasn't going to be handed to them. They had to fight for their freedom. So we are going to call them at this radio station, we're going to call them freedom fighters. Now, when I started college at 17. When you're 17, 18 years old, you just do what you're told. Whatever you put on the piece of paper, that's what I'm going to read. At that age, I wasn't invested in the deeper meaning of what that conflict was about at that age. Did a time come eventually when you? Oh, absolutely. When you recognize that terminology, words. I now think that words are the most powerful weapon that we as human beings have. They're more powerful than bombs. They're more powerful than money. Words can start wars. Words can end wars. You say the right word to the right lady, you could get married. You say the wrong word after you're married, you can get divorced. Words are tremendously powerful weapons, a power that I did not recognize when I was 17, how powerful words are. And that's what radio is. It's the medium of words. And we were using words in a way that weren't accurate, that weren't effective, that didn't speak truth, especially didn't speak truth to power in a way I recognize now, but I didn't recognize then. I just adopted the words that the majority media use because those were the words that we use. We call these people guerrillas because ABC, NBC, CBS, NPR, BBC called them guerrillas, so I guess that must mean they're guerrillas. Without being fully cognitive of all the meaning and being fully cognitive of everything that was involved when we placed that label on them.
Was Program Director Mfume a mentor, and who else was around individually at that time?
I'd say he definitely was a mentor. The main mentor for me was a gentleman who replaced Dave Levin as news director. When I went home for the summer of '77, after semester ended, and when I came back, they had a new news director. I told you about the conflict that was there, and I think as a result of that conflict and other things, they changed news directors. And Larry Dean, black news director, was the news director. And he probably had the most profound impact on me, other than my father, as a broadcaster in my life.
How so?
First of all, Larry Dean was very real, direct, personal, and to the point. He was a no-nonsense individual, while at the same time being somebody that you could relate to. And he was adamant about producing the next generation of African-American broadcasters. And he wanted us to step up to the plate in the right way. So he was not tolerant for anything that didn't meet a certain standard. And he would let you know. And I'm a sensitive individual. I wear my feelings on my sleeves. And when somebody tells me something directly, my feelings show. I'm not good at hiding what I'm feeling. And so it took a while for me to become accustomed to somebody who was that direct and who pulled no punches. Now, he pulled no punches with criticism, but he also pulled no punches with praise. And because he did both equally, you knew that if he praised you, he wasn't just blowing smoke. He wasn't just trying to be nice, because he's the same person that would let you know in no uncertain terms when it wasn't right. So you appreciated both because you knew both were coming from a place of honesty. And it was the first time that I began to adjust my perception that I spoke about earlier, where I always sought approval from white people. First time I had a black man who gave me approval, and it meant something. I didn't need to have anybody white. Larry, he's gone now. Larry Dean told me I was good. If Larry Dean said I was good, I was good. I ain't care what anybody else said. Larry Dean told me that I had a future in this business. Larry Dean told me that if I worked hard, that if I took this profession seriously, and when I knew that if he said that, it didn't matter whether it came from anybody else. He had 30 years in radio at that point. There was a black news network. At the time, it doesn't exist now. It's called Mutual Black Network. He was an anchor at that network. And he brought that body of experience, and this was towards the end of his career. He would pass away in 1985. This is 77, 78, when he first was news director here. And he had a profound impact on not just me, but every student that came to the radio station, and even those who weren't in the news department, even those who were on the music side, even those who were off air in various capacities. I think they would point to Larry Dean as the person who was the primary influence for them, not as people, but also as broadcasters. Kwesi was impactful mainly from watching him, because he was such a professional with everything that he did, from his sound on the air to his preparation to how he dressed to how he engaged people. He was a consummate professional. And so you learn more from Kwesi, at least in my capacity, from watching him and wanting to emulate his professionalism. He was a professional broadcaster. And again, Kwesi also helped me to migrate from that I need white people's approval mindset that I had once upon a time. I saw the person Larry Dean was in his history. I saw the professional that Kwesi was. And then I learned that there were people who shared my skin color, who knew what they were doing, and who had a level of professionalism. And then we had professors who did shows. And I would hear the depth of their knowledge and what they brought to the table from an intellectual point of view. And then it taught me that, there are black professors who are every bit as knowledgeable in their discipline, whether it's history, whether it's chemistry, whether it's math, whether it's whatever it is, that are just as expert, just as professional, just as knowledgeable as any white professor might be.
Who were some of those professors?
I'll start with the professor that I mentioned earlier, Dr. Lucia Hawthorne, who was the professor who I probably got closest to personally because she was in my major, communications. But there was a science professor, Dr. James Donaldson, here at Morgan State University. He wanted me to change my major to biology. When you're a freshman, you have to take classes beyond your major. You have to take a certain amount of science classes. So I took biology, not because I was interested in biology, but because you had to. And so he just happened to be my biology teacher. And he made biology interesting to me in a way that biology had never been interesting to me. How it related to me as an individual, how it related to us as a culture, how it related to the world. He tried to talk me into coming off the microphone and being a biology major. I ultimately resisted, but he was one of those professors who made profound impact on me, that, you still draw from things that they taught you, things that they said to you, the people that they were to this day. There was an English professor. I mentioned to you earlier that I think words are a powerful weapon. And she made me realize, more so than maybe anybody else in radio, how powerful words were. Rosalind Terborg Penn, she was a professor here at Morgan State University, and she taught me how precious words are, how impactful words are, how the spoken word and the written word need to be cultured carefully. You need to think about what you're saying and how you're saying it and how it's being received. It impacts what people think about you. Just the words that you use will impact how people perceive you as a person. And when you walk into it just naive, words are words, just something I use so I know how to get from point A to point B. But she taught me that they're much, much more powerful than that. And they have sustained, lasting impact. I think Martin Luther King's most powerful weapon, his words, more so than anything else. His words are what resonate today, and I think his words are what invoked change. Those people made me realize just how powerful words are.
How was WEAA received by the students and listeners in Baltimore in those early days? What gave you a sense that people were listening, and what were they saying?
Well, much like today, there were always economic struggles with just keeping the station on the air. And I remember one year, it was shortly after I had graduated. When I graduated, my first full-time job was as the assistant news director at WEAA. And we were at the point where might not be able to sustain it, might not be able to stay on the air, just didn't have the necessary resources to make it happen. So we had an on-air, I'll call it a fund drive, but it was an emergency fund drive. We didn't take pledges or donations. We had to have cash money now. And we made the case. We didn't hold back with where we were and what we needed in order to keep the station on the air, that we had to have people bring money, not pledges, not donations, not checks in the mail. We needed money. We set up 2 places around the city. We're in East Baltimore where Morgan State is located. We wanted to make sure we reached our audience in West Baltimore. There's a mall primarily in the black neighborhood in West Baltimore called Mondawmin Mall. And we set up a table, chairs in Mondawmin Mall. People could come and donate to the station either at the mall in West Baltimore or at the radio station on Morgan's campus in East Baltimore. And people were lined up around the mall coming to give and pledge to keep this radio station on the air. The building that we were in, Holmes Hall at the time, on this campus where the radio station was housed, we had people lined up threefold around the building waiting to come in and donate to keep the station on the air. I saw the love for the station in a way that I didn't even realize existed, because you're in a studio and sometimes wonder when you're talking on the mic, are you reaching anybody? Is anybody listening? And even if they are listening, are they being impacted? The words we're saying, the programming we're offering, does it mean anything to people? And to see it visually, when people showed up with money in their hand, realizing that we are in that need, kind of made me realize just how impactful this place was. And then the students that I matriculated through Morgan and through this radio station with, to see where they eventually went and became and are in this industry. We were just people who didn't know anything at the time. We just were going to be sponges, and we just wanted to learn. And this radio station gave me an opportunity and gave me a sense of myself that it wouldn't. If I had gone to a predominantly white institution, would I have even been given an opportunity to even be on the air? And even if I was, would the guerrilla freedom fighter debate have even happened in that environment? I kind of doubt it. And so there were things foundational that could have only happened here, foundational things that I carry with me to this day.
And WEAA is a learning lab, right? You're talking about the instruction that you received. Now, when you get hired full-time as a news director or you're an employee of this station, how does it feel to return the favor to the students that are working at the station? What's it like being on that side of the learning lab?
It's the foundation for why I do what I do. And it goes back to the gentleman I spoke of earlier, the man that brought me to tears, Larry Dean. He passed the baton to me. That was my turn. That's how I thank him. I got to pass that baton to others. He saw something in me. And he said to me, the way you thank me even when I'm gone, is when you see that student wide-eyed, doesn't know anything, just wants to get an opportunity. You better not turn them down. Better not turn them down. I do football games. I do play-by-play, and there are guys that, they and young ladies I want to get into. Hey, I want to announce a game. I want to do play-by-play. I want to be that announcer that announces, the Super Bowl, the World Series. Can I get a chance with you? Can I shadow you? And just such limited space at press boxes and places where you can have students on the mic getting that opportunity. And our football press box is so small, Will, so small that there's room for me and my primary commentator, and that's it. It's small. And so I decided that I was going to broadcast the games from the roof of the press box so that I could have students on the roof join me. Now, on the roof is fine when it's 70 degrees and sunny. Not a problem at all, really. As a matter of fact, it's even better vantage point to watch a football game. But every day is not 70 degrees and sunny. There are days when it's a little colder. There's days when there's wind and rain. But I still go to that roof now because Larry Dean's still in my head. You better not tell a student that you don't have room for him or her, or you don't have time for him or her. So to this day, I actively seek students, and when students seek me out, the answer can never be no. I owe Larry that. Mm-hmm. So the student component of HBCU radio that's the core. That's the foundation. That's what you don't get anywhere else. I wouldn't have got a Larry Dean except for this environment. I wouldn't have got a Kwesi and Fume except for in this environment. It really shaped who I am, who I became, not only what kind of broadcaster I am, but the kind of person that I am. If HBCU radio didn't exist, if WEAA had not existed. Now, I have worked in white places and spaces, and I've learned things that have helped me become a better person and broadcaster working in those places and spaces. Mostly in I haven't worked in non-commercial white radio. I've worked in commercial white radio. All my non-commercial experience is here at WEAA. So I don't want to make it seem as if there was no value that they didn't add, because they did. But there are some foundational things that could have only happened at an HBCU radio station.
And is it that sense of service that keeps you here? Because I'm sure you can make a decent living working in commercial radio and white-controlled stations, but what keeps you coming back here?
The sense of me being allowed to be me. To this day, when I'm on a microphone at a corporate white radio station, I still feel there's a part of me that I have to leave outside the studio door. I really believe that in every single person that has experienced America as a black person, there's a little Malcolm X in all of us. We may not admit it. We may not even know it. But there's some Malcolm in every single one of us. Even Clarence Thomas, the conservatives, there's some Malcolm in that man. I know there's some Malcolm X. I never met him. But if I got him one-on-one and we shut the door and we just, Clarence, let's talk, there's going to be some Malcolm and Clarence Thomas. But I don't feel I can bring Malcolm to a white AM Rush Limbaugh. Malcolm ain't going to work there. So I got to leave that Malcolm part of me, I got to leave that outside. But when I come here, I can be as Malcolm as I want to be. I can be as Lamont as I want to be. And that's the distinction that these places allow for. That just it doesn't exist anywhere else in the solar system. It just doesn't. In a way that you feel complete freedom to be who you are in every way, shape, form.
And can you say a little bit more about what it's like to broadcast HBCU radio sports? What makes these athletic contests special?
The history and tradition of these institutions, just how they were even came to be, and the fact that there are HBCU. It's because America said we're not going to let you have education. At one point in time, it was illegal to teach us to read. You could get arrested for teaching a black person to read. So we decided, okay, they don't want us to sit beside them in the classroom. We're going to educate ourselves. We're going to build institutions where we educate ourselves. So just that foundation of how they came to be makes these places special. And what they have instilled in me as a person makes them special. The struggle for resources to maintain them makes them special. How hard it is compared to predominantly white institutions to field a football team and to have facilities that are comparable and to be able to uniform, house, and weight room. So I know the struggle they go through, and I'm appreciative of that struggle. And I bring that with me to the microphone when I'm doing those games. It means something when Morgan plays Howard in a way that it doesn't have the same meaning when Morgan plays Towson, the predominantly white school 5 miles away from here. There's a tradition and a history and a culture and a resonance when those institutions are on the field together that, when we play Slippery Rock, it's not the same. It just isn't the same. And I've had the privilege of being on the microphone for games involving predominantly white institutions and enjoying the death. I just enjoy sports broadcasting. But there's a special layer in the HBCU universe that can't be replicated. We've had some schools that were once part of the African American conferences who have gone on to other conferences. Hampton is no longer in our conference. They're in a predominantly white conference. The CAA, North Carolina A&T, no longer in our conference. They're in a predominantly white conference. Same conference, CAA. Alumni of those schools will tell you there's something missing. When North Carolina A&T is playing Gardner-Webb, it's not the same as North Carolina A&T playing Howard. It's not, and it never will be, and it can't, because that history cannot be undone. You could take A&T out of the MEAC, okay, fine, they're out of the MEAC, but the history, you can't remove that. You can't change that. You can't alter that. That is what it is, and it will always be. And so for me, there's some extra special layer. Born, again, as I said, out of the struggle of how the schools came to be from the beginning. The fact that how A&T came to be, how Hampton came to be. Booker T. Washington, who founded Tuskegee. He's 22, 23 years old. He graduated from Hampton. At 22, 23, I aspired to be some things and do some things, but to aspire to start a university when you're 22, I'm going to go start a college. Who does that? He started at 22. He's starting a college, starting an HBCU, founded Tuskegee. I got some problems politically with Booker T, but I got tons of respect for somebody with the audacity. You gonna start a college? You 22. You can't even tie your shoes hardly. You gonna start, and he did it. And that institution survives and strives to this day. And I'm cognizant of what it took to even start those institutions. And that drives me every time I'm on the microphone.
That's really powerful. Is there a particular moment or a favorite moment broadcasting Morgan sports? You've been doing this a long time. Is there a time that you're proudest of or something that sticks out in your mind as a sports broadcaster here?
Yeah, probably a couple of things that probably stick out. I told you about Larry Dean and how direct he was. My very first broadcast as a sports announcer was in 1979. I did a Morgan Towson game. Morgan and Towson, even though they're located close to one another, had not played each other before. 70s, 60s, 50s, segregated America. Schools, black schools and white schools didn't play each other. So Morgan and Towson had never played each other in anything. And so in 1979, they played together for the first time. And I had the privilege, I was a student at the time, of broadcasting that game. And after the game, that following Monday, Saturday game, Morgan won that game. But I wanted to hear from Larry Dean. How did we do? As I told you earlier, his approval. If he said we did okay, then I know, okay, I did all right. That was horrible. That was the worst thing I ever heard. And he went down the laundry list of all the things that we did wrong on that broadcast. If you're going to do the rest of the season like this, you're not going to do any more games. You're not going to represent Morgan that way. You're not going to represent yourself that way. You're not going to represent me that way. That was ridiculous. And I still remember his criticism. Every time I go on the mic to do a game, I don't take every game for granted. Every game, I want it to be a game where if Larry were alive and listening to it right now, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I knew you could produce. That's where I knew the level you could be on. Every time I hit the mic, but with that memory in my head of how horrific my first effort was. I'm constantly wanting to raise the bar to make him proud. So I still remember that day, and I still remember when he tore it to pieces when I got back to the studio the following Monday after the game.
And how about a joyful moment where Morgan's winning in sports?
Unfortunately, Will, we haven't done too much of that. Winning. There's other HBCUs who enjoyed a history of winning much more frequently than have we. However, that very first year, 1979, Morgan went undefeated in the conference, the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference. They won the conference that year. In football, they were undefeated. They won the Mid-Eastern Athletic Championship. And I remember that season thinking to myself, man, how is it for announcers that announce these losing teams? How are they able to even do it? I actually remember thinking that my first year, 1979, when we won everything. Man, how could you even announce a team? Because that's all I knew. That was my first year, and we won. We have not had that. 1979 is a long time ago. Jimmy Carter was still president then. We have not had a season like that since 1979. And I remember one game in particular where they really had to fight and claw and scratch. They played South Carolina State, HBCU in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And at the time, they were one, and they still are. They won the championship again this year. One of the preeminent HBCUs on the football field. And we weren't really expected to beat them. We went down in 1979 in Orangeburg, in their stadium for their homecoming, and we whipped them to shreds. And I still remember that particular game when Morgan State dominated what at that time was a dominant HBCU in football. And then 1979, I'm coming back up the road, back here to Baltimore. After beating South Carolina State, we get close enough, turn on the radio, and I hear my Pittsburgh Pirates beating the Baltimore Orioles for the World Series championship in 1979. So I had my Morgan Bears win, beat South Carolina State, and then Pittsburgh Pirates, born and raised in Pittsburgh, winning the World Series that year, the World Series game. It wasn't the deciding game, but it gave us control of the series, Morgan winning the World Series game that year. So that stands out to me.
I'm going to shift gears and bring us towards the close of the interview. Now, this is a radio station that's seen quite a bit of change over the years, and you've been here and you've witnessed how this station has changed over the years. Even recently, the station seems to be in a really stable, solid place in terms of leadership and staffing. But how has it changed over the years? And if you could speak to sort of leadership and the institution itself.
I think it's changed in both some good ways and some not so good ways, just to be candid. The student input when I was a student, it was overwhelming. I mean, we were literally tripping over each other. There were so many of us. And again, you have to remember the media landscape then. There was radio and there was TV, then that was it. So if you wanted to be in media, there wasn't podcasting and the internet and Instagram and There was radio, there was TV. And anybody and everybody who wanted to be in media, this was the place to be. And we had mentors in place. The creator just made it so that we had a Larry Dean, we had a Kwesi Mfume, we had Al Stewart, we had the professors who did shows on a regular basis. We had community people, people who were community leaders. They also volunteered on WEAA. You got to interact with these people face to face. I met Muhammad Ali at this radio station.
What was that like?
WEAA, my hero. And it was larger than life because you don't think that these are people that are touchable, that you can actually look eye to eye with and talk to and relate to, and then you find out that they're just people. I found out that Muhammad Ali was a person. He was training for a fight, had come here to Baltimore, was training at a gym in East Baltimore, and he came over to the radio station and did an interview. He had done a promotional boxing match with Kwesi Mfume. It was just a promotional fundraiser type thing. And after that, there's still a picture that Kwesi has of him in a ring with Ali. But he came to the radio station. And I didn't know. You walk in, and there's Muhammad Ali. For real? You used to see him on TV. It blows you away. I'm a music fan. I remember Patti LaBelle came to the station. And I remember I was as close to Patti as I am to you. And I'm thinking, what am I even going to say to Patti LaBelle? But then, when I started talking to her, it was just like I'm talking. She was just a person. And she was just talking to me like she had known me her whole life, and we were just going back and forth. And where you from? I told her Pittsburgh, and she had some Pittsburgh experience. And you recognize that your heroes are people, good and bad. They're people. And I got introduced to some of those people through my HBCU experience here at WEAA.
And you were mentioning the station sort of drifting from that student-powered radio.
It did. There was more regiment and structure, which you need to have regiment and structure in any organization. But sometimes what you lose was that freewheeling. Anybody who walks in, we got a microphone for you. Because that's what it was when I walked in the door in 1977. When I walked in the door in 1977, it was before the station actually went on the air. They weren't on the air yet, but they knew they were going to be. So they were soliciting student interns who were interested. So I just walked in, and sitting at the very front desk was Al Stewart. He was the first general manager of WEAA. The first time I'd ever met him. I just walked in, and he just happened to be sitting at the front desk. Have a seat. What's your name? What's your major? Where are you from? I'm from Pittsburgh. My dad's on the radio. I want to be on the radio. Okay, we're going to put you on the radio. That can't happen now. I was a sophomore at the time. If a sophomore walked in the door right now and said, I want to be on the radio. Well, you got to fill out this form, and you have to pass this test, and you got to meet with this person. I literally walked in the door, didn't know me from Adam. Said, yeah, we'll put you on the radio. You don't have a do you have a license? No, I don't have a license. You had to have a license back then. Okay, well, we'll have you do the news because you won't need to operate the equipment. We just put you on the microphone. Can you do the news? I didn't really want to do the news, Will, but I wanted to be on the radio. So I said, sure, yeah, sure, I do the news. Little did I know at that time I'd fall in love with news and sports. But that was my way in, so I said, yeah, I'll do that. A student couldn't do that today. They couldn't. So that's kind of been lost to some extent. But I understand the reasons why, that maybe you can't do it that way now as it was when I first just walked in literally off the streets and was able to get from off the streets to on the mic, literally just like that. And the number of students that we had has changed. There's limits to how many interns that they can facilitate, and we lived at the radio. Well, if I wasn't in class, I was in the radio station, and sometimes I was doing something functionally radio related. Other times I was just a sponge, watching Kwesi or Larry Dean telling stories about his old radio days. When I observed the station in its current iteration, that kind of interaction really, it doesn't happen as it did when I was coming up. I'm glad it happened. I'm glad I came up. I think it's formed me in a way that's a little different. One of the things that I'm constantly screaming for, sports can be an all-boys club. I want to have female voices. So I'm constantly asking, are there female students? There got to be some. There's 10,000 students at Morgan State University. There got to be a female student somewhere in that 10,000 that's interested in sports. Where is she? I want to meet her. I want to be able to serve as a mentor for her. Finally found her this past semester. She's a senior now, so I'm going to have limited time with her, but the student input is a lot different than it was when I first walked in the door. And I think the other difference that kind of stands out is because they still have it, but not as aggressively, not as intimately. The community component. The activist in Baltimore's community. There was a microphone for them here constantly. Much as I said, students could just walk in and here's a microphone and you're live on the air. There you go. Community activists had that same kind of access to the airwaves, had their own shows, their own commentary, their input in stations' programming in a way that doesn't exist now. They're still on the air, and you still hear from them, but it's a more structured, regimented environment than existed then.
And do you think that is it necessary for institutional survival that it is more regimented like that?
Yeah, I understand the reason, and I think you're right. There are realities that have to be adhered to. You got to be able to pay the bills. You got to keep the lights on.
And you got to compete in a marketplace.
You do. And because of those driving factors, it's not 1977 anymore, and it's never going to be 1977 again. And so there are 2025 realities that have to be adhered to. So I definitely understand the reason why, but there are some things, despite those reasons, that are different, and I think different worse than they were then. But as you point out, there are reasons, and very real reasons.
Just a couple more. What do you want your legacy to be after leaving this station?
That I helped the next student. That's more important to me than anything, because that lasts beyond me. That's after I have uttered my last word on the radio. That lasts after I've uttered my last word on earth. That will last even when nobody even remembers who Lamont, Germany was. There'll be people at this radio station that will walk through these doors. What is a Lamont, Germany? What is that? But if I'm passing the baton, that person may not know who I was, but there's going to be a piece of me that person is going to carry with them when they walk in here. And so that's what matters to me more than anything else, the passing of the baton to that next generation of young people, and to make them know how important it is for them to do the same thing as they move onward and upward.
And why do you think it's important that our team, the HBCU Radio Preservation Project, is trying to document the history of HBCU radio nationwide?
I think there's a need to recognize the unique place in the media landscape that only HBCU radio provides, only get from HBCU radio. As a radio person myself, I listen to a lot of radio. And sometimes when you go from city to city and market to market in different places around the country, it's as if you're listening to the same thing. It doesn't matter where you are. It's the same thing. Every country radio station sounds like every other country radio station. Every hip-hop station sounds like every other hip-hop station. The uniqueness of the programming sometimes has been lost over the decades, but there is a extremely special cloth that HBCU radio has knitted in the fabric of our entire society that I think people aren't aware of. I think in a broad view, people kind of view it as it's just another radio station. What's special about that? Having lived radio my whole life, I know how special it was to me as a person, experience I would not have had if HBCU radio did not exist, experiences I want others to have. So I want HBCU radio to thrive and grow so those experiences can continue way beyond me. So, yeah, they held a very special place. And like anything else, people have to be educated. They may not know ostensibly. So that's why what you're doing is so crucial, so people can know the very special niche historically, foundationally, and It's not a once upon a time where we don't need them anymore. That's also important to grasp, that they still have a special place to this day.
Now, Lamont, we can't touch on every aspect of your life in a couple hours here. So if there's anything that you really want to get on the record that we haven't talked about, now is your opportunity.
I guess the only thing that I would add is the people part of this enterprise is the most impactful part of this enterprise. The off-the-air people part, the relationships that have been built, the people who I've encountered and met and considered friends, and even people I may consider enemies, they've all helped shape you. They all help to formulate who you are. And there is a magnet that is HBCU radio that draws people to it. And those people have enriched my life in ways that are invaluable, in ways that I could never repay. It's hard for me to imagine if you take that out of my life, if I had never come this way, just what would I be doing? Not just with my livelihood, but more importantly, who would I be just as a human being if you remove that from me? And I think there would be significant changes in what I would be about, what my priorities would be, just the kind of person I would be as a human being if you separate my experience from HBCU radio.
Thank you. Now, Lamont, you described yourself earlier in this interview as a loner. But, the only reason we're even speaking today is because you saw me sitting there in the lobby of WEAA. I didn't know who you were. You didn't know who I was, but you came up to me and you talked to me. You say, "Who are you? What are you doing here? How are you?" And I asked you who you were. And you said, I'm a Lamont, Germany. And I learned that you've been here from the beginning. And I just want to say that your interview is a gift to this project. And it's one of my favorite immediately. So I really appreciate your time today, and I'm honored to have received your story and to learn from you about your experience here at WEAA and in your life beyond.
There's a purpose for everything, man. We came together for a reason, and I'm going to consider mission accomplished.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You do the same.